We have independently verified the Scoville heat units of Pepper X, and I'm pleased to report that we've confirmed an average rate of 2,693,000 Scoville heat units.
Yeah.
It's a new Guinness World Records title for the hottest pepper.
Thank you, Andy.
Congratulations, you're officially amazing.
Let's make some noise.
There's a new hottest pepper in town, and I'm going to use chemistry to make it more than 5 times spicier. Hey everyone, welcome back to LabCoatz. Now, before I dive into this unholy and frankly painful endeavor, let me give you some backstory. About 2 years ago, I got my first real experience with heat when I tried the infamous Carolina Reaper pepper. I had bought a pack for this chili cook-off I was doing, and I figured I had to taste at least one. So, I cut off a tiny sliver and gave it a nibble.
Ooh.
I was genuinely impressed by how much spice could be packed into something so small. Of course, one thing led to another, and within a few months, I was extracting the world's spiciest chemical from an exotic plant that I bought on eBay. And I also started farming chili peppers. But, in that video I put out, I said the following in reference to the Carolina Reaper. No, there is no edible plant currently on the market that tops this pepper in spiciness. Obviously, this is no longer true. Officially. I was basing what I said on recognized cultivars, of which Pepper X is now the hottest, being over 20% spicier than the Reaper. So, to honor our new champion of heat, in YouTube chemist fashion, I'll be extracting its very essence, a compound called capsaicin, and using it to make my own ultra-spicy hot sauce. Now, bear with me, but to make this ultra-spicy capsaicin hot sauce, I had to start from another sauce. You see, Pepper X itself hasn't actually been released to the general public yet, so the only way you can get it is bottled up as a sauce. This is the official Hot Ones Xperience sauce, which is made almost entirely from Pepper X, with the rest being a mixture of vinegar and water. These last 2 ingredients could mess with the extraction process though, so they'll need to be removed. To do this, and officially kick off the extraction, I poured the entire bottle of Hot Ones sauce onto a foil sheet, and spread it into a thin layer. Then I preheated my oven to 230 degrees Fahrenheit, and threw everything in for roughly 3 hours. At this temperature, the water, vinegar, and other volatile compounds slowly bake out, leaving behind a solid cake that will be much easier to wash with solvents. Unfortunately though, some of the capsaicin was evaporated during this process, and it kinda made the air spicy. But I opened some windows, pushed through the pane, and was rewarded with nearly 12 grams of crispy Pepper X powder. So now, with the capsaicin locked in a more manageable solid medium, it's time for the step I'm sure almost everyone is familiar with, the solvent extraction. This has been covered by a bunch of other YouTubers before, albeit using far tamer peppers. But essentially, the whole process is just soaking the dried material in alcohol to dissolve the capsaicin, and then filtering off the unwanted solids. To expedite this process, I opted to use this nifty apparatus, called a soxhlet extractor. I don't want to go into too much detail about how it works, since I've kind of already done that, but essentially, you load whatever you want to extract into the main chamber, add a few hundred milliliters of solvent into the flask below, and heat it. The solvent vapors condense and drip into the main chamber, dissolving the capsaicin, and eventually siphoning back into the main boiling flask, allowing the cycle to repeat. Overall, the process is very solvent efficient and fast enough to make the whole extraction take only a few hours. Plus, it's just really fun to watch. After cycling for about 3 hours, it seemed like the extraction had run its course, since the pepper mixture was no longer dyeing the ethanol orange. So I took everything off heat and filtered the spicy alcohol into a storage bottle for safekeeping. Filtration was honestly kind of necessary since there was a bunch of white material left behind that obviously wasn't capsaicin. My best guess is this was actually Pepper X DNA, since DNA doesn't exactly dissolve very well in alcohol. But that's mostly just speculation. But hey, if I'm right, you're probably one of the first people to actually see the genetic material that Ed Currie worked so hard to cultivate. Maybe I could use this stuff to clone Pepper X. Probably not, but you've got to admit that would be cool.
Oh, come on! You gotta admit this is cool!
Anyways, at this point, I had gone pretty much as far as most YouTubers are typically willing to go. Since most people are only looking for a bit of insanely spicy red oil, the usual course of action after this is to just boil off the ethanol and call the resulting oleoresin good enough. But I'm not here for oleoresin. I'm here for capsaicin, which means I still have a bit of work to do. You see, pure capsaicin is a white, waxy solid with no real odor, and what I have here is a red liquid that reeks of peppers. Why? Well, because solvent extraction unselectively pulls out every soluble component, which in our case includes colorful carotenoids, spicy capsaicinoids, and a few other oils that contribute to the smell and flavor. Now, I had a few methods I wanted to test for getting the capsaicin on its own. The first one is the one I used before to extract the saffron from my root beer: steam distillation. The idea here is to use boiling water to carry over the most volatile components at temperatures below their actual boiling point. And given what I knew about capsaicin, I definitely had reasons to believe this would work. I mean, the carotenoids would be non-volatile solids under these conditions, and I knew from baking the hot sauce that some capsaicin would be vaporized. Plus, steam distillation is used all the time to isolate the menthol from peppermint, and menthol has almost the exact same boiling point as capsaicin. But alas, after boiling off the ethanol and distilling over with some water, I got nothing. The distillate was honestly less spicy than a bell pepper. But I wouldn't say it was all for naught. A small amount of oil did collect in the receiving flask, meaning there would be one less contaminant in the final capsaicin. And, given the strong smell, I would say this impurity was most likely the essential oil responsible for the pepper's flavor and odor. Again, another part of this legendary pepper that not many people get to see. So, with the steam distillation out of the way, I moved on to my second method for separating the capsaicin: column chromatography. Chromatography is a method used by many labs to separate compounds based on how polar they are. You'll get to see how in a minute. To carry out this step, I first prepared a mixture of 75% xylene, 20% ethyl acetate, and 5% methanol by volume. This was loosely based around a few papers that specified similar mixtures, but with benzene or petroleum ether in place of xylene. Xylene is between the two solvents when it comes to polarity, so I figured it would be a valid substitution. Using around 100 milliliters of this solution, several grams of chromatography-grade silica gel was suspended and transferred into a large burette plugged with cotton. There are actual columns made for this purpose, but I obviously don't have one. And besides, a taller column is usually better for separations anyway. To prepare the capsaicin for extraction, I took the mixture left over from the steam distillation and washed it several times with ethyl acetate. The ethyl acetate washings were combined, dried over calcium chloride, and gently boiled down using a hot water bath. Then, when there was only a small amount of solvent left, the mixture was filtered and loaded into the column. And with everything now ready, a few milliliters of the xylene solution were added on top, and the stopcock was opened. As the pepper extract passed through the column, the most polar molecules were attracted and held back by the similarly polar silica gel, while the least polar molecules were progressively washed away by the relatively non-polar solvent. In a chromatography setup like this, the less polar a molecule is, the faster it travels down the column. The carotenes, which are all purely long-chain hydrocarbons, elute first, followed by the xanthophile pigments, which are similar but also contain a few polar hydroxyl and epoxide groups. And finally, there's the capsanthin, which is the major carotenoid in hot peppers. This should be one of the last compounds to pass through the column, at least according to the table I'm referencing, possibly due to the polar carbonyl group on one end of the molecule. It took a few hours, but in the end, I'd passed all my xylene-based solvent through the column and separated everything that passed through into fractions. And, for good measure, I rinsed the column with ethyl acetate to pull out any remaining material. Now, at this point, I was expecting the capsaicin to be somewhere in the middle, since that's kind of where the paper suggested it would be. However, the authors of the paper were using thin layer chromatography, not columns, so the results I got were a bit more interesting. After drying and tasting tiny portions of each fraction, absolutely none of them were spicy. As it turns out, the xylene-based solvents only pulled out the carotenoid pigments, leaving the relatively clean capsaicin with a small amount of chlorophyll and residual pigments in the ethyl acetate washings. And upon realizing this, I honestly got pretty excited by how much color appeared to be separated. So I loaded all the spicy ethyl acetate into a round-bottom flask, put it on a hot water bath, and proceeded to boil off the solvent. At some point, the volume stopped decreasing, but it was obviously still wet with residual xylenes. So I loaded the remaining extract into a small vial and heated it until the temperature hit roughly 160 degrees Celsius. Hot enough to remove all the solvent, but not hot enough to boil or burn the capsaicin. Once this temperature was reached and the boiling had stopped, I took the waxy solid off heat and prepared for my final purification step. Which, in hindsight, probably should have come before the chromatography step, but oh well. Following a similar process to Nile Red, I mixed up a 5% solution of sodium hydroxide and added it to the oily residue. You see, capsaicin is slightly acidic and will dissolve in water if the pH is high enough, so dissolving it like this actually helps separate it from certain compounds that are otherwise similar. And, based on what Nile Red showed, I was hoping the capsaicin would reform as a fairly clean semisolid upon acidification. However, that wasn't really the case. I did manage to produce a solid precipitate upon acidification with hydrochloric acid, but this ended up having a melting point well above 100 degrees, and capsaicin melts at less than 70. The capsaicin ended up mostly staying in solution as an emulsion, which I washed with some heptane and then extracted with more ethyl acetate. Not really what I was expecting to do, but hey, at least I managed to remove one last impurity, which I'm thinking might just be leftover fatty acids. And that's it. After boiling off the ethyl acetate for one last time, I was left with some nice, reasonably concentrated capsaicin, with minimal impurities. Although it would probably be cleaner if I displaced the air with an inert gas during the heating steps. I blame the dark color on oxidation, as well as a small amount of residual pigment and chlorophyll. So now, with the capsaicin as pure as I can possibly get it, it's finally time to let it touch my taste buds and see just how painful it truly is. But for this taste test, I won't be licking a toothpick like I did for resiniferatoxin. Oh no, this time I'll be doing a real comparison, with chicken, a lineup of different hot sauces, and a habanero for good measure. To briefly go over what's in store, the mildest sauce here is Louisiana hot sauce, coming in at a lukewarm 1,000 to 2,000 Scovilles. After that, we have a pretty massive jump to my own personal hot sauce, made from homegrown Carolina Reapers and ghost chilies. If I had to guess, I would say my sauce lies right around 1 million Scovilles, since it's mostly peppers with a bit of vinegar, spices, and oil. Following the Armstrong sauce, we have another reasonably large jump to the Hot Ones Xperience sauce, made with 91% Pepper X. This is the hottest purely pepper sauce in the world from what I've gathered, and if it's anything like the peppers used to make it, it should be well over 2 million Scovilles. A monstrous number for sure, but nothing compared to our last contender. While it probably isn't pure enough to get a perfect 16 million Scoville rating, the capsaicin I extracted from Pepper X is almost certainly hotter than the 9 million Scoville Mad Dog Plutonium sauce, which appears to be just an unrefined pepper extract. Needless to say, this will almost definitely be the hottest thing I will ever taste. Alright, so we've finished extracting the capsaicin from the Pepper X sauce, and now it's time for the moment that is a little bit sketchy, which will be tasting it on some wings. We've got a lineup of a few different sauces. Like a basic sauce, Louisiana hot sauce. Then a hot sauce that I actually made a while back that is mostly Carolina Reaper and ghost pepper. So, pretty spicy. Then, of course, the last dab, the Pepper X version. And finally, pure capsaicin. I also have some habaneros here, if I want to see what those are like. But, yeah, let's get into it. Alright. Like I said, first up, Louisiana hot sauce. Not sure what the Scoville rating on this is, but I imagine it'd be too spicy. Not much heat at first. It's a little bit spicy. On a scale of 1 to 10, that's probably like a 3, maybe. It's not really that hot. I could eat that on some other stuff. Not too bad. Alright, next up, the Carolina Reaper and ghost pepper sauce that I made. Got a little dollop on there. At this point, it's starting to get a bit spicier. Yeah, it's pretty hot. It's, I'd say about a 6, maybe a 7 out of 10. It gets hotter the more times you eat it. So I'd say at that one time, it's not terrible, at least not yet. It's kind of building though. So, yeah, I'd say about a 7 out of 10 in terms of spiciness. Not the end of the world, but definitely not a mild sauce. I'm gonna give myself a minute to cool down just to make sure what I just ate doesn't interfere with the next one, which is, of course, the Hot Ones Pepper X sauce. So, be back in a minute. Back again. Okay. Now for the Hot Ones Last Dab Xperience Pepper X sauce that I used to extract the capsaicin. There's just a little bit left in here, but it'll be more than enough. This is 91% Pepper X, which is the official world record new hottest pepper at 2.69, I think around 2.7 million Scoville. So, well hotter than the Carolina Reaper. Oh, that'll do. Cheers. Has a really good smoky flavor. Okay, so you can immediately tell that it's spicier than the previous sauce. It's kind of coated my tongue and a bit on the back of my throat, and it's just kind of building up. And it's got a pretty good burn to it. I mean, it's definitely, so far, the hottest thing that I've ever eaten. So, I'll give that a probably 8 or maybe a 9 out of 10. Because I'm pretty sure that if you ate a Pepper X or something like that directly, it'd be a lot worse than in a sauce. That's just from my experience. Not the end of the world. I'm sure if I like dunked a whole bunch onto the wing, that it would have been a lot worse, but yeah, that is really hot. I have a little bit of the milk now. Let's see how that is compared to just an ordinary red habanero pepper. So, by comparison, this sauce is supposedly in the realm of 2 million Scoville, and this pepper is around 100 to 300,000. So, it should be way less spicy, but from my experience eating hot peppers, for some reason, eating a hot pepper is always way, way worse than a sauce. Sauce just kind of builds up to a certain level of heat. Eating a pepper is kind of like immediate pain. So, let's see what this is all about. One of the tricky things about habanero peppers is the outer skin doesn't really have a lot of heat, so you kind of have to bite into it until you get to something that's hot. There's a little spot. Feels more like a volatile heat, like it kind of goes, it kind of aerates your mouth. Whew. To me, that was worse than the Pepper X sauce. At least right now it is. Whew. Eating that was a bit of a mistake. At least directly after the hot sauce. It's all in the front of my tongue and the sides of my mouth. Yeah, it just kind of hurts right now, like on the tip of my tongue. Maybe it's because I got a bit of a bigger amount in my mouth compared to the Pepper X sauce, but that is no joke. I'll get back to you in a minute. Okay, habanero pepper was a bit worse than I was expecting. I have a few theories about why that might be, but maybe a little bit more apprehensive about tasting pure capsaicin. Regardless, there's no point in putting this off. I'm going to use a toothpick to cover the wing with it. So let me remind you, this is all the capsaicin I extracted from this basically entire bottle of Pepper X sauce. All right, here it is. What might be the world's spiciest hot wing. Here goes. because it tastes kind of like chemical. Okay. I spat out just because it didn't taste like something that you should be eating, kind of chemically, but the pain is rising. It's under my tongue of all places. Oh boy. The burn from this feels a little bit more like the hot sauce kind of burn, like it's building up, as opposed to like the peppers, which I guess it's more solubilized and just immediate. But this is building, and it's getting probably, it's right around the level of the Pepper X right now, and it just passed it. Let's see if I can. Oh, that made worse. Oh boy. That is definitely way spicier than the Pepper X. It's a different kind of feeling than the Habanero, but it's yeah, it's hot. It's really hot, and it was a very, very small amount that I put on there, like barely 2 toothpickfuls on the end. My nose is running. I'll be right back and get tissue. Somehow it's still seeming to rise. It's covered my entire tongue. My tongue is just feeling heat right now. It's just kind of burning. It's kind of leveling off a little bit here. For such a small amount, that was quite the experience. Very, very hot. Alright, so it was pretty bad. What I honestly thought would be too little capsaicin proved to be worse than a whole glob of the Pepper X sauce. And that's saying something. Now, I could have theoretically made it worse by dissolving it in a bit of alcohol, which would mimic how capsaicin is found in the juices of a pepper like the habanero, but to be honest, I felt like I'd experienced enough agony for one day. But if you'd like to experience the searing pain of 1,000 jalapenos, or just have a cool collectible, I might be able to help you. I dissolved the remains of this Pepper X capsaicin in a tiny amount of ethanol, and if you want a sample of it, just donate $15 to my channel using the links below. Just be sure to include your address so I know who to ship it to. And, as a little bonus, I'll also include some of the spice-depleted Pepper X powder. I can't endorse it as a legitimate food product, of course, but if you want to give it a taste anyway, and experience my crude approximation of Pepper X without the heat, be my guest. Alright, that's pretty much everything I've got for you today. As always, I'd like to thank you all for watching, and gently encourage you to subscribe. Trust me, I've got a bunch of videos planned out that you do not want to miss. For example, cooking a legal version of meth. That sounds fun, right? Or what about making the only chemical that has ever sent me to a hospital? I promise it's probably not what you think. Anyway, a huge shout out goes out to all my supporters on Patreon. Without the support of viewers like you, I probably wouldn't be able to afford most of my projects. Remember to like, share, and subscribe, and I'll catch you next time. LabCoatz out.